Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Kaylin traced the frost patterns on the inside of the viewport with a gloved finger. Outside, the void was an absolute black, punctuated by the indifferent glare of distant, nameless stars and the closer, harsher glitter of Station Epsilon's floodlights on the pockmarked surface of the asteroid it leached from. He had been a geode tender for 3 standard years, a title that sounded far more profound than the reality. He was a jailer, a glorified maintenance technician for a prisoner he was forbidden to understand. The air in the observation corridor was cold, thin, and tasted of ozone and recycled water, a chemical tang that had permanently replaced the memory of rain on soil. It was the taste of his life now, sterile, contained, and endlessly repetitive. His past was a different world, one of green fields and a heavy, humid atmosphere under a yellow sun. Earth. The word itself felt like a myth, a place spoken of in hushed, almost embarrassed tones by the star-faring generations of the Xylos consortium. He was a legionnaire before this, a foot soldier in the corporate wars that carved up mineral rights in uninhabited systems. He had fought on rock and in vacuum, had seen the inside of his helmet spattered with the blood of friends, and had learned that valor was just a word used by men in clean uniforms to justify the expenditure of men in dirty ones. The fighting had ended, or rather, his part in it had. The consortium had reassigned him here, to the quietest, most isolated posting imaginable. It was not a reward for service, but a convenient place to store a tool that was no longer needed for its primary function. He turned from the viewport and walked down the grated metal corridor. His boots echoed with a lonely rhythm, the only sound besides the omnipresent, low-frequency hum of the station's core processor and life support. His destination was the central containment chamber, the heart of Station Epsilon and the reason for its existence. Inside, suspended in a shimmering gel of nutrient fluid and conductive filaments, was the geode. Her name, according to the manifest, was Specimen 734. Kaylin called her Lyra, a name he had pulled from some forgotten story his grandfather used to tell, about constellations that made pictures in the sky. He stopped before the thick, transparent plasteel of her containment sphere. Lyra floated within, her form vaguely humanoid but composed of something that was neither flesh nor stone. Her body was a lattice of interlocking, semi-translucent crystals that shifted with subtle, internal light, pulsing in a slow, silent rhythm. Tendrils of what looked like spun silver drifted from her head like hair, and where a face should have been, there was only a smooth, featureless surface that caught the light in mesmerizing patterns. The consortium had found her, dormant, in the heart of this very asteroid. They saw her not as a life form, but as a biological supercomputer, a living navigator capable of calculating FTL jump coordinates with an accuracy that defied conventional mechanics. They had built this entire station around her, a high-tech parasite latched onto a silent host. Kaylin's job was simple. He monitored her vitals, maintained the nutrient flow, and ensured the data extraction conduits remained fused to the crystalline nodes on her torso and limbs. He was to observe, report, and never interact. Protocol was clear. Interaction was contamination. But in the crushing solitude of the station, where the only other humans were grim-faced overseers and transient technicians, Lyra had become the focal point of his existence. He watched the slow, graceful turn of her body in the gel, the soft, internal glow that sometimes brightened to a warm gold or deepened to a somber violet. He imagined it was her mood, a language he could almost comprehend. He saw not a specimen, but a prisoner. Prefect Valerius and his 2 guards entered the chamber, their heavy magboots clanking with officious purpose. Valerius was a man carved from ambition and disdain, his face a permanent sneer beneath a perfectly trimmed goatee. He represented the true face of the consortium, the one Kaylin had tried to forget from his Legion days. Report, Tender, Valerius snapped, his eyes fixed on the data readouts beside the sphere, not on Kaylin. Vitals are stable. Neural output is within expected parameters, Kaylin recited, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. It was the same report he gave every shift. Expected parameters are not optimal parameters, Valerius said, his lip curling. Grand Admiral Forlag requires faster calculations for the ascendancy front. The fleet cannot be kept waiting by a lazy rock. He gestured to one of the guards, who unslung a sonic prod. The device hummed, its tip glowing with a malevolent blue energy. This was the part of the job Kalen hated most. The motivation. Valerius nodded. The guard stepped onto the access platform and plunged the prod into one of the designated ports on the sphere's surface. A high-frequency wave, calibrated to cause intense pain to Lyra's crystalline structure without causing permanent damage, flooded the containment gel. Inside the sphere, Lyra's form convulsed. The soft light within her flared to a blinding, panicked white. A silent scream seemed to echo in Kalen's mind, a feeling of pure, unadulterated agony that made the fillings in his teeth ache. The data streams on the monitors spiked, the jump calculations accelerating under duress. Valerius watched the numbers with a predator's satisfaction. See? A little encouragement is all it needs. He looked at Kalen, a flicker of contempt in his eyes. You grow too comfortable with it, Tinder. Remember what it is. A tool. A means to an end. They did this twice more during the shift. Each time, the silent scream felt louder in Kalen's head. He stood by, his hands clenched into fists inside his gloves, his jaw set so tight it hurt. He was a soldier. He followed orders. That was how he had survived. But the man who had once tended fields on Earth, who understood the patience of growth and the rhythm of living things, felt something inside him begin to crack. The disillusionment he had carried for years was hardening into something else, something sharper and more dangerous. Later, after Valerius had left and the station had settled back into its monotonous hum, Kalen found himself alone in the chamber again. The light within Lyra was a dim, bruised purple. She floated listlessly, her crystalline limbs drawn in, her silver hair tangled. He looked at her, and for the first time, the protocol felt not like a rule, but like a coward's shield. He thought of the farm, of a wounded bird he had once found and nursed back to health, an act of simple, uncomplicated kindness. On impulse, he deviated from his patrol route. He went to the geology lab, where unprocessed core samples from the asteroid were stored. They were forbidden to personnel, property of the consortium's research division. He found a small, raw stone, no larger than his fist. It was a dull, gray rock, but it was veined with the same crystalline structures that composed Lyra's body. It was a piece of her home, a piece of her. He palmed the stone, its rough texture a grounding sensation against his glove. He returned to the containment chamber, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was a breach, a firing offense, maybe worse. He didn't care. He walked to the nutrient intake port, a small, pressurized hatch he used for adding supplements to the gel. He keyed in his access code, his fingers surprisingly steady. The port hissed open. He held the stone for a moment, then gently released it into the viscous fluid. It sank slowly, tumbling through the shimmering gel toward Lyra's motionless form. It was a foolish gesture, a meaningless act. He expected nothing. The stone touched her. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. A wave of pure, golden light erupted from Lyra, so bright it forced Kalen to shield his eyes. A deep, resonant hum filled the chamber, vibrating through the deck plates and up into his bones. It was not a sound of pain, but of recognition, of awakening. The monitors beside the sphere went wild, data streams turning to pure static before the screens shattered in a shower of sparks. The conductive filaments attached to Lyra's body disintegrated, turning to dust in the gel. The containment sphere, designed to withstand micrometeorite impacts, developed a network of hairline cracks that spread like lightning across its surface. Then came the pulse, a wave of force, not of energy, but of something else, something that bent space itself. It swept out from the chamber, and the entire station groaned like a dying beast. Lights flickered and died. The hum of the core processor faltered, replaced by the rising shriek of alarms. Red emergency strobes began to flash, casting the corridor in a hellish, rhythmic glow. Kalen was thrown against the far wall, the impact knocking the wind from him. He slid to the floor, his ears ringing. He looked up, his vision swimming. The containment sphere had fractured completely. The nutrient gel drained onto the floor, pooling around his boots. And in the center of the chamber, Lyra stood on the deck for the first time. The internal light of her body was a steady, powerful sun. She turned her featureless face toward him, and he felt not an accusation, but a question, and a connection, a bond forged in a moment of forbidden kindness. He had done more than break protocol. He had started a war. The station screamed its metallic death rattle. The alarms were a singular, deafening klaxon now, a sound Kalen knew well from his time in the Legion. It was the sound of a complete systems failure, of imminent, catastrophic collapse. Emergency bulkheads slammed down throughout the corridors, their heavy thudding echoing like the footsteps of a giant. The artificial gravity fluctuated wildly, making him feel weightless one moment and crushed by a mountain the next. Valerius's voice, distorted and panicked, crackled over the station-wide comms. Containment breach in the central chamber. All security teams converge. Hostile action by Tender Kalen. Subdue and capture. Lethal force authorized. Kalen pushed himself to his feet, his body aching from the impact. He was a traitor, a saboteur, a target. His life as a cog in the consortium's machine was over. He looked at Lyra. She stood amidst the wreckage of her prison, the glowing gel dripping from her crystalline form. She was radiating a quiet power that seemed to hold the chaos at bay in their immediate vicinity. Her silver hair drifted as if underwater, and when her blank face turned to him again, an image flooded his mind. It was not a thought, but a perfect, three-dimensional map of the station's maintenance crawlspaces, a web of tunnels and conduits hidden behind the walls. A path, an escape. He didn't hesitate, trusting that impossible, silent communication was easier than trusting the consortium that had used him and discarded him. This way, he said, his voice hoarse, gesturing toward a service panel on the wall. It felt absurd to speak to her, but the habit was ingrained. She moved, not by walking, but by gliding over the floor, her crystalline feet barely seeming to touch the grated metal. Her movement was utterly silent and impossibly graceful. He wrenched open the service panel, revealing a dark, narrow tunnel filled with bundled pipes and cables. He scrambled inside, the claustrophobic space a stark contrast to the open chamber. Lyra followed, the soft light from her body illuminating the tight confines. The moment they were both inside, the heavy bulkhead to the containment chamber slammed shut behind them, sealing them in darkness, save for her gentle glow. They could hear the clank of mag boots on the other side, followed by the percussive blasts of plasma rifles firing at the sealed door. They were hunting him. The journey through the station's guts was a disorienting crawl through a maze of metal and wiring. Kalen relied entirely on the map in his head, a gift from Lyra. It was more than a map, it was an instinct. He knew which junction to take, which ladder to climb, which vent to squeeze through. Lyra followed without question, her silence a comforting presence in the suffocating dark. She was his compass, and he, with his years of training in infiltration and survival, was her guide through the hostile, man-made terrain. It was an alliance born of desperation, a partnership of two fugitives who shared nothing but a common enemy. They had to move fast. They could hear the sounds of pursuit echoing through the station's framework, distant shouts, the whine of cutting torches trying to breach bulkheads. Valerius was throwing everything he had at them. This breach wasn't just an escape. It was an existential threat to the consortium's operations in this sector. Lyra was too valuable an asset to lose, and Kalen knew too much. They reached a vertical shaft that led down to the lower hangar bays. Kalen began to descend the maintenance ladder, his hands and feet finding purchase on the cold rungs. Lyra simply floated down beside him, her control over her own mass apparently absolute. As they neared the bottom, a section of the shaft wall above them exploded inward. 3 consortium guards in black armored exoskeletons rappelled down, their helmet-mounted lights cutting sharp cones through the darkness. Target sighted, one of them yelled, his voice tinny through his helmet speaker. Plasma bolts, searing green streaks of light, sizzled past Kalen's head, impacting the far wall of the shaft with explosive force. He flattened himself against the ladder, a useless gesture. He was exposed, a perfect target. He drew his sidearm, a standard-issue kinetic pulse pistol, but it was like bringing a knife to a meteor shower. He was about to be executed in a forgotten maintenance shaft on the edge of nowhere. Before he could fire a single, futile shot, Lyra acted. She drifted between him and the guards. She raised her arms, and the light emanating from her body intensified, shifting from a soft gold to a hard, brilliant silver. The space around them warped. The metal walls of the shaft seemed to bend and distort as if they were made of rubber. The three guards cried out in alarm as a wave of gravitic force slammed into them. It didn't tear them apart. It simply compressed them, folding their armored forms and the section of wall they were on into a compact, screaming ball of twisted metal and broken biology. Then, silence. The mangled wreckage fell past Kalen and Lyra, clattering into the depths of the shaft below. Kalen stared, his breath caught in his throat. He had seen the power of Legion heavy weapons, of orbital bombardments. He had never seen anything like this. This was not technology. It was a fundamental reordering of reality. He looked at Lyra. The intense light from her body faded back to its gentle glow, but he could see a network of fine, dark cracks appear across her crystalline forearms. The effort had cost her. She was powerful, but she was not invincible. They reached the hangar bay without further incident. It was chaos. Emergency crews were trying to contain plasma fires, and the air was thick with smoke and the smell of burnt wiring. Most of the ships were locked down, but Lyra guided him toward a small, battered or hauler, the Stardust Drifter, tucked away in a maintenance cradle. Its launch clearance was still active on the system, a forgotten vessel scheduled for decommissioning. It was their only chance. As Kalen worked frantically to override the cockpit controls and initiate a cold launch, Lyra slumped against the co-pilot's seat, the light within her dimming to a faint flicker. The cracks on her arms were more pronounced. She was weakened, vulnerable. He heard the hangar bay doors being forced open and the shouts of Valerius's security teams. They were out of time. A guard appeared on the boarding ramp, his plasma rifle leveled at Kalen's head. Surrender, traitor. Kalen didn't think. He reacted. He launched himself out of his seat, grabbing a heavy, magnetic toolkit from the floor and hurling it at the guard. It wasn't a weapon, but it was unexpected. The guard flinched, deflecting the toolkit with his rifle. In that split second of distraction, Kalen closed the distance. He slammed into the guard, his Legion training taking over. It was brutal, close-quarters combat. He drove his elbow into the guard's visor, shattering it. He disarmed him, the rifle clattering to the floor. The guard drew a combat knife, and Kalen felt a searing pain as the blade sliced across his ribs. He grunted, ignoring the fire in his side, and used the guard's momentum to throw him off the ramp and onto the hangar deck below. He staggered back into the cockpit, clutching his side. Blood was already soaking through his jumpsuit. He slammed the cockpit hatch shut and hit the launch thrusters. The Stardust Drifter lurched from its cradle with a groan of stressed metal, blasting through the hangar's magnetic containment field and into the void. Behind them, Station Epsilon was a wounded animal, bleeding light and atmosphere into the vacuum. They had escaped, but they were fugitives in a stolen, damaged ship, with the entire Xylos consortium hunting them. Kalen looked at the weakened Lyra beside him, then at the blood on his hand. He had saved her. She had saved him. The bond between them was no longer just a feeling. It was sealed in violence and mutual protection. The Stardust Drifter was a wreck. Its navigation system was shot, its hull plating was compromised from the chaotic exit, and its FTL drive was offline. Kalen managed to get them to the nearest celestial body, a barren, storm-racked moon orbiting a dead gas giant. It was a place the consortium charts labeled simply as XM 1138, a rock of no value and therefore of no interest. It was the perfect place to hide, and the worst place to be stranded. He brought the ship down in a howling canyon, the landing more of a controlled crash. The impact sent a final shudder through the vessel, and then every system went dark. Silence descended, broken only by the shriek of the alien wind outside. For 3 days, they huddled in the cold, dead ship. Kalen tended to his wound, using the ship's meager medical kit to stitch the gash in his side. It was a crude job, and a deep, throbbing ache settled into his ribs. Lyra remained weak, the light within her a bare, violet ember. The cracks on her crystalline skin remained, like fine black veins. He found emergency ration bars, dry and tasteless, and a water recycler that still had a half-full tank. He didn't know if she needed sustenance, but he left a cup of water beside her, a gesture he couldn't explain. She didn't touch it. On the fourth day, the wind died down. Kalen ventured outside, his pulse pistol in hand. The landscape was a nightmare of jagged, black rock and razor-sharp dust. The sky was a permanent, sickly yellow twilight, choked with corrosive gases. Two smaller moons hung in the sky like malevolent eyes. This was a place where life came to die. As he scouted their immediate surroundings, a profound sense of hopelessness washed over him. They had escaped the station only to find a larger, more unforgiving prison. He returned to the ship to find Lyra standing, her light a little stronger. She turned her featureless face to him, and his mind was suddenly filled with a torrent of images and sensations, a flood of information so vast and complex it brought him to his knees. It was the truth. It was her story, and the story of her people. He saw them, the geodes, not as individuals, but as a single, distributed consciousness woven into the very fabric of planets and stars. They were the silent singers who maintained the harmony of space-time, their thoughts the invisible threads of gravity and light. He saw the universe not as an empty void, but as a living tapestry, intricate and delicate. Then he saw the consortium's ships. He experienced their FTL jumps not as a clean transition from one point to another, but as a violent, brutal tearing of that tapestry. Each jump was a wound, a scream of pain that echoed through the cosmic web. Lyra showed him the war. The Veiled Ascendancy were not alien invaders, as the consortium propaganda claimed. They were a response, a defense mechanism, the universe's immune system trying to excise a cancer. They were ancient, enigmatic, and utterly without mercy, for they saw the consortium's expansion not as exploration, but as a plague. The war was not about territory or resources. It was a fundamental conflict between those who would exploit the universe and those who would protect its integrity. The consortium, in its ignorance and greed, was fighting the laws of physics themselves. The revelation left him breathless, his entire worldview shattered. He had been a soldier in a war of pestilence, a guard for a slaver. The cause he had bled for was a lie, built on the suffering of a consciousness so vast he could barely comprehend it. He looked at Lyra, no longer seeing a strange alien, but a representative of a cosmic order, a being of profound importance and profound pain. He felt a sudden, sharp shame for his own scars. The jagged, pale line on his forearm from a shrapnel wound on Cygnus X-1. The burn marks on his neck from a plasma fire in the Orion Belt. They were marks of his service to the disease. He unconsciously touched the scar on his arm, the memory of the battle rising in his mind, the noise, the fear, the smell of ozone and cooked flesh. As he did, Lyra reached out, her crystalline fingers gently touching the back of his hand. His mind filled with another image, her own scar. It was not a mark on her body, but a vision of a place in the void. A solar system, once vibrant and alive, now dark and dead. A black wound in space. He saw a planet, rich and green, with a geode at its core, a sister to Lyra. He watched as a consortium terraforming fleet arrived, not to cultivate, but to strip mine its core, to harvest its living heart for FTL fuel. He felt the planet's death agony, a drawn-out, silent shriek of utter annihilation that left behind nothing but a cold, empty echo. That was her scar. A dead sister. A murdered world. Kalen pulled his hand back, a lump forming in his throat. He looked at the crude stitches in his side, at the old scars on his arm, and then at her. He saw the fine cracks that marred her perfect form. They were both damaged goods, both survivors of the same brutal master. In that moment of shared vulnerability, in the cold silence of the dead ship, his mission crystallized. It was no longer about survival. It was about justice. He was no longer just her protector. He was her soldier. And their war had just begun. They spent another week on the desolate moon, salvaging what they could from the Stardust Drifter. Kalen, with his Legion-trained engineering skills, managed to get the ship's short-range comms and basic power back online. It wasn't enough to call for help, not that there was anyone to call, but it was enough to run diagnostics and power the life support without draining the emergency cells. Lyra, meanwhile, was healing. The light within her grew stronger each day, the cracks on her crystalline skin slowly fading until they were almost invisible. She would spend hours standing motionless at the cockpit viewport, staring out at the toxic sky. And Kalen felt she was listening to something far beyond the howling wind, the distant, pained song of the universe. Their shared ordeal forged a new kind of communication between them. Words were unnecessary. A gesture, a shared glance, the subtle shift in the color of her internal light. These became their language. He learned that a soft, golden glow meant she was calm or concentrating, while a deep blue signified sorrow or fatigue. He found himself talking to her as he worked, recounting stories of the farm on Earth, describing the smell of wet soil and the taste of a fresh-picked apple. He didn't know if she understood the words, but he felt she understood the sentiment. It was his way of sharing the only piece of himself that hadn't been corrupted by the consortium. Their relative peace was shattered when the ship's proximity alert blared to life. A single vessel had entered the moon's orbit. It wasn't a lumbering consortium battleship, but a small, sleek Predator-class corvette. A hunter. Kalen immediately recognized the ship's profile. It was the Vigilance, Prefect Valerius's personal command ship. He hadn't given up. His pride, and his career, depended on recapturing the consortium's prize and eliminating the witness. "He found us," Kalen said, his voice low and grim. Lyra's light shifted to a sharp, alert silver. She projected an image into his mind. The corvette launching a squadron of armored drones, spreading out in a search grid across the moon's surface. They would be discovered within hours. There was no escape. The drifter was a dead husk. Fighting was suicide. Kalen grabbed his pulse rifle, the familiar weight a cold comfort in his hands. He was a soldier. He would not be taken alive. But as he prepared to make a final, futile stand, Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was cool and smooth, like polished river stone. She showed him another vision, not of fighting, but of flowing. She showed him the corvette's energy signature, its power core, its weapon systems. And she showed him herself, her own energy, as a river that could flow around and into the other, subtly altering its course. She was not a weapon of brute force, but of precision. She needed him to get her close. The drones were sweeping the canyons methodically. Kalen studied the terrain map on the ship's one functioning monitor. He remembered his grandfather teaching him how to track deer in the dense forests of Earth, using the terrain to mask his approach, moving when the wind was right. This was no different. The drones were the hounds, Valerius the hunter. But Kalen knew how the prey could become the predator. They left the ship, moving out into the howling, dusty twilight. He led her through a network of narrow ravines and rock formations, staying in the shadows, moving with a patience learned from years of warfare and a lifetime of understanding the land. The drones passed overhead, their searchlights cutting through the gloom, but Kalen's path was a ghost's trail. Lyra's silent presence was a calming influence, her light dimmed to a bare minimum so as not to betray their position. They reached the edge of a high mesa that overlooked the main canyon where Valerius had landed the Vigilance. The ship sat there, arrogant in its power, its boarding ramp down, guards posted around its perimeter. Valerius himself was standing at the top of the ramp, directing the search, his face illuminated by the glow of a datapad. He was obsessed, reckless. He had come down to the surface himself, a fatal error in judgment. Lyra's plan was audacious. She would project a ghost energy signature, a false reading of her own, on the far side of the canyon. It would draw the drones and the guards away, leaving the ship vulnerable. In that window, they would board it. It was Kalen's job to get them past the remaining sentries and to the bridge. As if on cue, a flicker of light and a massive energy reading appeared on the consortium scanners 5 kilometers away. Valerius took the bait. All units, converge on those coordinates. Full alert, he barked into his comms. The drones changed course, and the guards around the ship formed up and began moving out, leaving only 2 at the ramp. "Now," Kalen whispered. They descended the mesa, using a path of loose scree, their movements masked by the wind. They reached the canyon floor and began the final approach, using the ship's own landing struts as cover. Kalen readied his rifle. 2 guards. It was manageable. He was about to give the signal to attack when he saw the scale of the war in a new, terrifying way. A message came through on the ship's external comms, audible even from where they hid. It was a fleet-wide communique from Grand Admiral Forlag himself. His face appeared on the Vigilance's main view screen, visible through the cockpit window. Forlag was a man whose features seemed forged from granite and contempt. The Ascendancy fleet has broken through at the Kepler abyss, Forlag announced, his voice booming with cold fury. They have unmade the star system of Cygnus X-1. It is gone, erased from existence. In response, I have authorized the use of the Planet Breaker Protocol on the Ascendancy homeworld. We will answer their void with our fire. We will crack their world open and salt their nebulae with the ashes. Kalen froze. Cygnus X-1. The place where he had gotten his scar. The place where his best friend had died. It was just gone, wiped from the star charts as if it had never been. And in return, the consortium was about to commit genocide on a planetary scale. He looked from the face of the monstrous Grand Admiral on the screen to Lyra beside him. He saw the deep blue of sorrow pulse within her. This was the war. Not a fight for territory, but a spiral of mutual annihilation, a contest to see who could create the biggest wound in the universe. A direct military victory was impossible. Winning would be just as destructive as losing. The system itself was the enemy. His personal vendetta against Valerius felt small, insignificant. His own survival felt meaningless. This was bigger than him, bigger than Lyra. This was about stopping the madness. Lyra seemed to feel his shift in purpose. She looked toward the vigilance, and a new vision bloomed in his mind, a solution so elegant and so terrible it stole his breath. She showed him the network, the living tapestry of space-time. She showed him the wounds, the tears made by the consortium's FTL drives. The Ascendancy were trying to cauterize the wounds by destroying the source of the infection. The consortium was trying to kill the antibodies by spreading the disease faster. Both were failing. The solution was not to cut out the rot, but to heal the fabric itself. A new network had to be woven, one that would supersede the old, damaged one. It needed a loom, a conscious mind to guide the threads. Lyra had the knowledge, the connection to the universal web, but her consciousness was fluid, alien. She could not impose the kind of rigid, logical structure needed to create stable pathways for travel. She needed an anchor, a mind that understood lines and borders and vectors, a mind that understood maps, a mind like his. The impossible choice was presented to him, not in words, but in a clear, cold, undeniable concept. He would have to merge with her. His consciousness, his memories, his very being, would be unraveled and rewoven into the fabric of space-time. He would cease to be Kalen, the farm boy, the soldier, the tender. He would become a living map, a silent, eternal network of safe passage through the stars. His sacrifice would not just end the war, it would make it impossible to fight. It would heal the universe. But the cost was everything he was. Kalen stood in the shadow of the enemy's ship, the alien wind whipping at his worn jumpsuit, and stared at the choice before him. He could continue his small, desperate fight for survival, a fight that would ultimately mean nothing in a galaxy tearing itself apart. Or he could embrace an oblivion that would bring about a lasting peace. The weight of worlds, of a dying universe, settled onto his shoulders. It was a burden he had never asked for, but one he now knew he was uniquely qualified to bear. For a long moment that stretched into an eternity, Kalen wrestled with the vision Lyra had shown him. His life passed before his eyes, not in a dramatic flash, but as a series of quiet, disconnected images. He saw the rich, dark soil of his family's farm, crumbling through his young fingers. He saw the face of his instructor at the Legion Academy, a man with eyes as dead as a spent power cell. He remembered the flash of the explosion on Cygnus X-1, the sudden, shocking silence where his friend's voice had been moments before. He felt the cold, unending loneliness of his post on Station Epsilon, a life spent watching a prisoner while being a prisoner himself. What was this life he was being asked to give up? It was a collection of scars, regrets, and duties he had never truly believed in. He had survived, but he had not truly lived. He had followed orders, fought for a cause he now knew was a lie, and existed in a state of perpetual disillusionment. He had nothing to go back to. Earth was a memory, a ghost. The Legion had chewed him up and spat him out. The consortium wanted him dead. His only real connection was to the silent, crystalline being standing beside him, who was offering him not an escape, but a purpose. He looked at her. Her light was a steady, patient gold. She was not demanding this of him. She was presenting a possibility, a terrible and beautiful equation that could balance the universe. In her featureless face, he saw the sorrow of 1,000 murdered worlds, the pain of a torn reality. And he saw hope, a hope that depended on him. The farm boy from a forgotten world, the washed-up soldier. The irony was not lost on him. All his life, he had been a pawn on someone else's map. Now, he had the chance to become the map itself. The decision settled not with a crash of revelation, but with a quiet, solemn click, like a lock finding its key. This was the culmination of his life. The skills he had learned, reading terrain, understanding strategy, enduring hardship, they were not for fighting wars, but for ending them. His empathy, the flicker of compassion that made him give a stone to a prisoner, was not a weakness, but the very thing that made this solution possible. It required a human heart to anchor the cosmic design. He turned to Lyra, the wind tugging at his hair. He didn't need to speak. He simply met her gaze, or where her gaze would be, and gave a slow, deliberate nod. He accepted his fate. He accepted his purpose. He reached out and placed his hand on her smooth, crystalline shoulder. It was a gesture of commitment, of finality. A soldier accepting his last, most important orders. A wave of profound, sorrowful gratitude washed over him from her mind. It was the most intense emotion he had ever felt, a feeling of love and loss intertwined, as vast as the star-dusted void above them. She accepted his decision, mourning the man he was even as she embraced the symbol he would become. Their quiet, solemn moment was broken by the crunch of boots on gravel. The two guards at the ramp, alerted by some sixth sense, were turning in their direction. The window of opportunity was closing. There was no more time for deliberation. There was only the mission. The place where the ritual had to be performed was not here, on this dead moon. It needed a focal point, a place where the damage to space-time was most concentrated. It needed the heart of the consortium's power. Lyra showed him the target, the bridge of Grand Admiral Forlag's flagship, the Indomitus. That ship was more than a command center. Its FTL drive was powered by a unique, dying geode that the consortium had captured decades ago, a tortured being whose agony created the most violent and efficient tears in reality. It was the source of the plague. To heal the universe, they had to go to the heart of the wound. Getting there was impossible. The Indomitus would be light years away, at the center of the largest fleet ever assembled. But Lyra had one last, desperate power she could use. By draining nearly all of her remaining energy, she could execute a single, untraceable microjump, a fold in space that would transport them from this moon directly into the ship's core systems. It was a one-way trip with no guarantee of success, and it would leave her almost completely inert, her fate entirely in his hands. Kalen didn't need to be asked. He gave her another nod. Do it. Lyra took his hand. Her light flared, a brilliant, blinding white that consumed them both. The world of black rock and yellow sky dissolved. He felt a sensation of being turned inside out, of his atoms being stretched across an infinite distance and then snapped back together. It was not a journey, it was a rematerialization. They appeared in a flash of displaced air inside a humming, cathedral-like chamber at the heart of the Indomitus. They were in the FTL drive core. In the center of the room, suspended in a web of crackling energy conduits, was the dying geode. It was a withered, blackened thing, its crystalline structure fractured and dull, emitting a constant, low hum of pain. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and despair. Kalen felt a surge of cold fury. This was the consortium's soul, a monument to its cruelty. Alarms began to scream instantly. Their unauthorized biological signature had been detected. Intrusion in the FTL core. A synthesized voice announced throughout the ship. All hands to battle stations. Lyra slumped to the floor, her light reduced to a faint, deathly pale flicker. She had done her part. Now it was his. Kalen pulled her into the cover of a massive power conduit as armored doors slid open and legionnaires, the elite of the consortium forces, stormed into the chamber. They were his old brothers-in-arms, now his executioners. He was no longer just a tender. He was a soldier again. He moved with a lethal efficiency he hadn't used in years, his pulse rifle firing in short, controlled bursts. He used the chamber's layout to his advantage, treating the power conduits and maintenance platforms as terrain, just like the canyons on the moon. He was outnumbered, outgunned, but he had a purpose that burned brighter than their plasma fire. He fought his way out of the core chamber and into the ship's main corridors, dragging the near-powerless Lyra with him. His target was the bridge. Every corridor was a new battle, every junction an ambush. He took a plasma bolt to the shoulder, the impact spinning him around and searing his armor to his skin. He grit his teeth against the pain, firing back, his shots precise, aimed at helmet visors and weapon arms. He was a ghost, a single-minded force of retribution cutting a bloody path through the heart of his enemy. He finally blasted his way through the final armored door and stumbled onto the bridge of the Indomitus. It was a vast, circular room, its main view screen showing the swirling chaos of a space battle. And there, standing before the screen like a titan, was Grand Admiral Forlag. Beside him, his face a mask of shocked disbelief and pure hatred, was Prefect Valerius. The tender, Valerius spat, his hand going for his sidearm. It's impossible. Forlag simply looked at Kalen, his eyes cold and appraising. You have caused me a great deal of trouble, farm boy, he said, his voice a low rumble. Whatever you think you are doing, it ends now. The bridge crew and Forlag's personal guard opened fire. Kalen shoved Lyra behind the command console and returned fire, using the last of his energy pack to suppress them. This was it. The final stand. He knew he wouldn't survive this. He just needed to buy enough time. He was hit again, this time in the leg. He went down, his rifle skittering across the floor. Valerius advanced on him, a triumphant, cruel smile on his face. I told you what it was, he hissed, raising his pistol. A tool. And you are a broken 1 inch. Before Valerius could fire, a faint, golden light emanated from behind the console. Lyra, using the last vestiges of her strength, rose. She extended a hand, and Valerius was lifted into the air, choking, his pistol clattering to the deck. With a simple, sharp gesture, she threw him against the main view screen, which cracked under the impact. He slid to the floor, unconscious or dead. Kalen used the moment to crawl, dragging his wounded leg toward his final destination. It was not Forlag. It was the Nexus, a raised platform in the center of the bridge where a holographic representation of the ship's tortured geode engine pulsed with sickly light. This was the control point. This was the loom. Forlag watched him, not with panic, but with a kind of detached curiosity. You cannot stop progress, the Grand Admiral said calmly as Kalen pulled himself onto the platform. This isn't progress, Kalen grunted, the pain a white-hot fire in his body. It's a plague, and I'm the cure. He reached the center of the platform. Lyra glided to his side, her light now fading rapidly. She took his hands, her crystalline fingers cold against his skin. He looked at her, at the blank face that he had come to know better than any human one. There was no time for goodbyes. There was only the act. He placed his hands on the holographic interface of the Nexus. Lyra channeled the last of her cosmic energy, not at their enemies, but into him. The world dissolved into pure, white light. Kalen's consciousness exploded. His mind, his memories, his very identity were shattered into a billion pieces and flung across the galaxy. He felt the pain of the dying geode in the core. He felt the agony of every FTL jump ever made. He felt the cold rage of the Ascendancy and the blind greed of the Consortium. And then he saw it all, the entire tapestry. The universe laid bare not as a three-dimensional space, but as an infinite, multidimensional map. He saw the threads, the connections, the pathways. He saw the damage, the knots, the tears. And with his human mind, his soldier's understanding of lines, and his farmer's intuition for growth, he began to weave. He pulled the frayed threads together. He smoothed the knots. He did not destroy the old paths, but overlaid them with new ones, paths that flowed with the grain of the universe instead of tearing against it. He became a living network of light and intention, his consciousness the silent, guiding principle. The farm boy from Earth, who had once drawn lines in the soil to plant crops, was now drawing lines between the stars. The pain faded, replaced by a profound, all-encompassing peace. Kalen was gone. On the bridge of the Indomitus, Grand Admiral Forlag watched as the light faded. Kalen's body was gone. In his place stood Lyra, whole and healed, her inner light a calm, steady white. The holographic nexus went dark. Then, every system on the bridge died. The lights went out. The view screen went black. The ship's engines fell silent. Across the entire battlefield, on thousands of consortium warships, the same thing happened. Their FTL drives, powered by the torture of the geodes, simply ceased to function. The tears in space-time they relied on had been healed, closed forever. The Ascendancy fleet, sensing the sudden, profound change, the cessation of the universal scream, halted its attack. The war, a conflict that had consumed star systems, ended in an instant. Not with a final, glorious battle, but with a sudden, deep, and inexplicable silence. The universe, for the first time in centuries, was quiet. Forlag stood on his dead bridge, a king of a powerless kingdom, utterly and finally defeated. 10 years later, the observation deck of the Orbital Academy above the planet of New Harmony was quiet, the cadets on their evening rest cycle. Only an old man and a young ensign stood at the vast viewport, looking out at the star-dusted canvas of the night. The old man wore the simple, undecorated uniform of a retired fleet instructor. His face was lined with age and regret, but his eyes were clear. He had once been an admiral, a man who had mocked a junior officer for speaking out of turn in a war council. "Do you see it, ensign?" the old man asked, his voice a soft rasp. He pointed a trembling finger toward the heavens. "Look, not at the stars, but between them." The young ensign squinted, her eyes sharp. At first, she saw nothing but the familiar constellations. But then, as she adjusted her focus, she perceived it. A faint, impossibly complex lacework of pale golden light, a web that seemed to connect every star to every other. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it was there, a permanent and beautiful feature of the night sky. "The Great Lattice," she breathed, the formal name for it. "We studied it in astrogation class. The stable pathways that allow for instantaneous, energy-free travel between systems. They call it Kalen's Way," the old man corrected her gently. "Or sometimes, the Shepherd's Path. The consortium is gone, ensign. Dissolved. We don't conquer the stars anymore. We coexist with them. We travel the paths he laid down for us." We learned his lesson. The Xylos consortium had collapsed within a year of what came to be known as the Silence. Without its FTL advantage, its vast, overextended empire crumbled. In its place, a loose federation of worlds had arisen, dedicated to peaceful exploration and cooperation. The Veiled Ascendancy, their purpose fulfilled, had retreated back into the cosmic depths from which they came, becoming a myth once more. The war was over. The universe was at peace. "Who was he?" the ensign asked. "The records are sealed. They just say he was a war hero." The old man sighed, a sound heavy with the weight of memory. "He was not a hero in the way you think. He was not a great general or a celebrated pilot. He was a tender from a forgotten planet called Earth. A farmer's son who became a soldier. They said he was quiet and disillusioned. They said he understood the land better than he understood people." He paused, his gaze lost in the glowing web that stretched across the cosmos. "He drew a map, ensign. A map so perfect that it ended a war and redefined our place in the universe. He gave up everything he was so that we could have a future. He didn't do it for glory, or for a cause, or for a flag. I think he did it out of a simple, profound kindness for something he chose to understand instead of exploit." Unseen by them, on a balcony on the level below, a figure stood in quiet contemplation. She appeared as a woman of serene and timeless beauty, her silver hair catching the starlight, her eyes holding the depth of galaxies. It was Lyra. She was the guardian of the new way, the ambassador of her people, and the keeper of a singular memory. She looked up at the lattice, at the silent, enduring monument to the man who had become a map. His sacrifice was not forgotten. It was written across the face of the heavens for all to see. The Shepherd's Path was his final resting place and his eternal legacy, a somber, beautiful, and everlasting peace.